You're listening to Mark of the Maker. Hey everybody, I'm Mark Steiner and you're listening to Mark of the Maker, and this is episode 68 of the show. We have a pretty cool historical topic with a couple of expert guests that have taken the opportunity to join us, and we'll get to that in just a second. Let's make sure we have folks here. We have Mr. Sean Kendrick.
Hey.
And we have Mr. Michael Birch.
I'm here.
And unfortunately...
Womp, womp, womp.
Mr. Tom Krine's having some kind of internet troubles tonight, so Tom's not going to join us, which is a bummer because he's interested in this topic, and I know he really wanted to be part of it. So, sorry, Tom.
Mm-hmm.
If he were here, that's what he would say. Sorry.
Yeah.
So, we'll get with Tom next time, and he'll join us for the next episode, I'm sure. So, it's either that or he just can't leave the grinder. He's that guy, right? Where sometimes he just can't leave the grinder, no matter what the time of the day is.
He's playing hooky.
Playing hooky, yeah, he might be. Okay, we do need to say some thank yous to some people. First of all, as always, our Patreon folks have been fantastically supportive of the show. They keep us rolling. They are very kind and send us a few bucks every month, and for that we are very thankful. So high five to all our Patreon supporters. We really appreciate your help and your consistent support of the show. That's been actually on a growth path for us, so that's beautiful. If you're not a patron of the show and you enjoy it, please consider it. Go to patreon.com, patreon.com, and just search for Mark of the Maker, and you can find us there. And if you want to send us a couple of bucks every month, we'd love to have it, and it helps keep this thing moving, so we appreciate that.
And we'd also like to thank George Palagonia of American Metal Exchange. He's been a friend of ours, been supplying us with titanium, zirconium, and basically sometimes he has zircotai. He also is the American distributor of Damasteel. You can hit his website at amxinc.com. He's a good dude. He's been supplying us for a while. Hit him up.
Yep, George's a good guy.
Agreed. And he makes a mean chimichurri.
Ooh.
Good to know.
Hey, if he ever offers you some chimichurri,
take him up. All right.
Yeah.
All right. That's good to know.
Don't second guess it. Look at gift horse in the mouth.
Do not miss the opportunity. Okay, so as we mentioned, this is a history episode, I think is a safe way to put it. And we have two guests that have joined us to talk about it. I'm not sure we've had two guests at the same time before, have we?
Mm-hmm.
No, so this is a new one for us. We have Mr. Ricky Ray.
Hi, Mark. Thank you.
Yeah, welcome to the show. And we have Mr. Neil Punchard. I think I'm saying that properly.
Yep, that's correct. Hi, guys, and hi, audience.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks for taking the time to chat with us. So Ricky and Neil collaborated, I think that's the right description, collaborated on a book about Boker. And I have a copy of it here in front of me. Boker, 2 Centuries and 2 Countries Representing One Name in Cutlery Excellence. I like that title. That's awesome.
That's a mouthful, isn't
it? It is, but it's great. And so I think, this will be an interesting one for our listeners because a lot of the folks that listen to the show are kind of into the custom knife side of things and maybe don't necessarily have a understanding of the depth and breadth of Boker's history and range over the years. I think this will be a really good way to help clue some folks in, myself included, on some of the history that's there and the story that goes along with it, because it sounds like it's quite a convoluted story, right?
Oh, yeah.
So, what we normally do when we have folks join us is spend some time talking about their history, and we probably should do that here. So Neil's written books before, and we'll talk about Neil's background in a minute, but Ricky, this is your first time doing this kind of project, writing a book, right?
Yes, it is. Very first, and maybe the last. I don't know.
Not if I can help it.
There you go. There you go. So, kind of what got you motivated to do it? Were you into knives before as a collector, or kind of maybe that's the best place to start, right? It's always helpful for people to understand how someone got into knives at all.
Mhm.
Well, my dad was a big collector, so I inherited the collector gene. With him, it was pocket watches and old coins. For me, I've been a collector of things my entire life. It's coins, cars, pocket watches, guitars, firearms, old chess sets, you name it. I pretty much collect it. But I am fairly new to the knife collecting world. My brother gave me an old Boker knife back in 2008. So fairly recently, it was Boker Pattern 85, I think, a little two-bladed jackknife. So, it was a Boker USA. Probably
Okay.
like most people who start researching Bokers, I had no idea about the company. I didn't know how old this knife was. It could have been made in the 1930s. It could have been made in the year 2000. I had no idea. So started visiting some internet web pages, visited allaboutpocketknives.com, iKnife Collector, Blade Forums, all of those guys. Found that while people really respected the Boker brand and they really liked the knives, most of them were like me. They said, "Hey, I've got this really neat knife. I don't know anything about it."
Right.
So I love a good mystery. I love to research. I'm a mechanical engineer, and the research and the background is a big part of my thing. I really started buying up really any old paperwork, books, anything I could find about Boker Company, old catalogs,
Oh, that's cool.
bill of sales, newspaper articles, just anything I could find. Pretty much did some heavy research for about 10 years, made myself a Boker expert, I guess you would say, and started answering a lot of questions for some of the guys online who had questions. Hey, I've got this knife. What can anybody tell me about it? You know how that goes.
Yeah.
And Neil contacted me and said, "Hey, you want to write a book?" And of course, I thought it was a prank.
Right.
Who is this guy? And no, I'm not an author, and I'm really not interested in writing a book. But then I saw some of Neil's work. He sent me a couple of his books, and he really led the way. He's the brains of the operation, and he made
That's
it
not true.
really easy.
Maybe there's a little mentoring process in there, might be a safe way to say it.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's really cool.
If I can jump in just a minute, this project works so good with Ricky. Even though I had done some books, like Ricky just said, he had not only a great collection of knives, but he had an enormous amount of paperwork. And if you're going to write anything, an article or book, you need two things. You need the material and you need the information to back it up. So, and like Ricky, I had collected an awful lot of paperwork myself. So when we finally got together, I think we were both impressed that we had so much information, catalogs, hardware, factory catalogs, just things that backed up the knives dating back to the late 1800s. So to say I'm the brains is nowhere near the truth. We came into this as equal partners, and we had a great working relationship. And Ricky did as much or more than I did on the book. So anyway, I'll back off and jump back to Ricky, but I just wanted to jump in there and say, man, he was great.
If you don't mind me asking, where do you track down the paperwork?
Primarily eBay. As for me, it's amazing the stuff you'll find on there, and folks don't necessarily know what they've got. I will say that's changed over the past couple of years, and I think we're partially to blame for that because so much of this stuff has the price has risen on both the Boker knives and the catalogs and all the background information that goes along with it.
I bet so.
You know, it's funny that you mentioned cars, Ricky, because when you started to describe how, okay, I got this knife and I got interested in Boker, and then I went to find old catalogs and reference info wherever I could find it. That to me that's what I always think of as like car collector guy kind of stuff too, right? Like I have this certain model year of car and a certain engine in it, and you know, it's like, wow, that makes me want to go find out how many, you know, 64 Dodge lightweights in this color red were made, that kind of stuff. And, so yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, the research was really one of the greatest things for me. Just that challenge of digging out little pieces of information and trying to put together a story. And in this case, the Boker book and the Boker family is a really interesting story to me.
Were you able to find reference materials? You know, there's so many, I don't know, hundreds of tables at Blade Show. Was the knife show circuit any help from that reference material perspective? There's so many places in there, right? There's so much stuff squirreled away where it's kind of like if you actually went to every table, you might find stuff like that. Yes,
I found some things at knife and blade shows, gun shows. It's amazing where you'll find these little fragments. I think I was at a yard sale and found an old Cooper Tool Group catalog, and it was a tool catalog, but I started thumbing through it, knowing that there was that relationship between Cooper Tool and Boker USA, and found that it had some pocket knives within that catalog. So,
oh yeah, very cool.
You pick it up everywhere.
Yeah, look under every rock when you're doing that. Right?
I'd agree with Ricky, though, that by far the bulk of the information that I have gathered over the years has come mostly off the internet. You know, whether I've ordered catalogs or hardware store books, the bulk of it has come off the internet. I don't find that much at shows. Great knives at shows, but not so much in the way of literature and paperwork.
Yeah, okay.
And when we say dig, I think Ricky would agree that it's not like we're looking, you know, once a month or a couple times a year. When I'm doing books or doing a project, I'm looking every single day. I'm searching, you know, catalogs, I'm searching literature, I'm searching names, I'm searching stuff. And there's really is a lot of work, and it's like panning for gold. I mean, you're digging and digging and digging, and you come up with a nugget. And maybe next week you find something else, but that doesn't mean you're not searching, you know, every day or sometimes a couple times a day just for, you know, certain things, certain years, certain genres. So just a lot of digging.
Right.
So to kind of use that analogy, do you ever get sidetracked? Like you're digging for gold, do you find a little bit of silver and put that to the side and start collecting? Like, have you done the same with other companies? Like,
absolutely. Plus the fact I'm a guy, I get distracted so easy. I'll go from a knife to a motorcycle to a pocket watch, and then go back to the knife again, thinking, "Hey, I kind of lost my way here." But I think that's part of the fun, and I think it makes it interesting when you do find these little, you know, excursions off to the side.
Oh, I bet so. I'd say like looking for Boker and then finding like a bunch of king cutter stuff. So you start a file on that.
Exactly. Oh, absolutely.
All right.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, we have that sometimes when we're researching for a show where we have a specific topic. You know, we'll do a thing like ethnic knives, right? And so we'll go to try to find some specific knife style and dig back through some history and find, you know, maybe a modern example and a very old example, because they're really cool to contrast sometimes. And those are giant rabbit holes as well, right? Where it's like, whoa, I started out looking for this thing to research for the show, and now suddenly it's 4 hours later. What happened? Right? And I'm looking at something entirely unrelated, and it's like, oof. Yeah. Pump the brakes, Ricky, back it up.
I got a question on you on this, once again, on this research. So you got that first folder, and you started looking into it, probably like at a surface level, you know, kind of want to know what year it was made. what part of Boker made you want to dig so much deeper? What aspect of that, or what did you find that made you go, I want to learn a whole lot more?
Really just the story of the Boker family, just as much as the Boker knife making company interested me. Now, there were a couple of really neat things, like the Boker USA story. Many people think of Boker as strictly as a German company, but they don't know that Boker USA, they made Boker knives in the U.S. for almost 90 years.
Yeah.
And so they are, in that respect, they're an American company. But just the story of the family, I mean, in Solingen, the family had been cutlers, sword makers for hundreds of years before the modern era, and before there was a Boker company. And then, of course, it started out as a cottage industry there, and just the courage that it took back in the 1800s for when the Boker family moved across the Atlantic to the United States and Canada and Mexico, and they kept those family ties. Even during times of struggle, during World War I and World War II, you had members of the same family who were on opposite sides of these political struggles.
Oh.
And
So you
if I
weren't-
can jump in for a second, and that's kind of an odd scenario because you look at so many companies like Case, where there were so many other companies that came out of Case basically because the family members didn't get along. And Ricky hit the nail on the head when he said that the Boker family were really a tight-knit group, and they stayed together as families, even though they were spread out, basically around the world. They really kept working together, where in America, all of these companies were splits and family members were pissed off at other family members and would form other companies. But it's kind of refreshing and kind of an anomaly that the Boker family stayed together, like Ricky said.
Okay, so it wasn't just about tracking down, which model was done this year. It was almost a genealogy type of situation too. You're tracking the family across where they moved to and did and all that stuff.
It's funny you should mention that genealogy, because that was one of the early parts of it for both of us.
Right.
Neil and I both separately, unknown to one another, had worked on the genealogy of the Boker family.
Yep.
And when we got together and started working on the book, we compared notes. The family side of it really struck a chord with me. And modern day Boker company is kind of the same way. Ernst Felix Dalachow, who is the honorary president of Boker and Solingen for so many years. Now his family's still carrying it on with Karsten and Kirsten, his son and daughter, is still running the company. And I don't know if there's any company that, any cutlery company anyway, that has that kind of longevity with a single family.
Yeah.
No, it hasn't been bought and sold and traded and moved around.
Died, reborn, all that kind of stuff.
Right.
So it sounds like it was as much a human being story as it was about the knives that got your interest.
It really was.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I agree.
Don't get me wrong. I love the knives as well, and I've got a safe full of about 400 Boker knives to prove it. But I really love the story. I tell you the truth, if we had included everything that we'd dug up about the family and the trials they went through, the book probably would have been, instead of being 178 pages, it probably would have been about 400.
Oh, easily. You got to know when to cut it off. And Ricky and I as we were going along, we were adding things. And at some point you go, we have to Yeah, we have to keep this to a reasonable size and a reasonable cost to sell the book too.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Just one in particular. If you think about John R. Boker, he was in the U.S. military during World War II, and he did some training. He worked overseas in Great Britain. As the war wound down, one of his jobs was interviewing some of the German officers from the German Air Force. And based on a lot of his interviews and a lot of his work, I mean, it was kind of the beginnings of some of the groundwork for the U.S. The secret, not the Secret Service, the CIA. And we know a lot of the old German Luftwaffe guys played a big part in the U.S. space program.
Right.
So he was a rock star to me because John Boker not only served in the U.S. military, served in World War II. When he came back home, he was the one who was responsible for getting the tree trademark back with the Boker Company.
Yep.
Okay. The U.S. Confiscated the trademarks for German companies during World War II. John Boker, being in the U.S., he was able to recover that trademark for the Boker Company in 1947. He heavily invested in the infrastructure of the U.S., responsible for a railroad going to New Jersey, where the Boker manufacturing in the U.S. was located. And the odd thing is, after all of these things this guy accomplished, he was most known as a stamp collector. When he died, that was the headlines on his.
Yeah, isn't that funny? A guy that runs the Boker Company is known for collecting stamps.
Yeah.
Now we're going to need you guys to give kind of a little bit of a rundown of the family after we talk to Neil about kind of his background and how he got to this, because we're going to need, I don't know, sort of a timeline, for my head to kind of nail it down. And I'm interested in finding out how that happened about the family now.
Sure.
What so Ricky, doing this thing for the first time, it's with Neil having had experience doing this, that probably had to be super helpful. But what kind of challenges did you face with this whole idea of writing a book? For me, it seems pretty daunting, the whole concept of it. So what kind of stuff did you have to work through?
Well, the research and finding these bits of information, it was the most difficult part of it, but it was also the most enjoyable part of it to me. There was also, once all this information was gathered, I felt really comfortable on the anonymous internet, sharing information, sharing what I'd discovered. I would take photos of catalog pages and post them up, but the first book, pretty much like the first interview, I think I told Mark, I hope this is not too boring. I don't know what I have that's that interesting to say. And I felt the same way about the book. I was like, yeah, I'm not an author.
Right.
But Neil was certainly a big help. And the subject matter is so enjoyable to me and so interesting to me that the difficulties were part of the enjoyment.
Okay.
Now, once we started putting words to paper, probably the biggest challenge for me was knowing when to stop talking, knowing when to stop writing, because I think the target, Neil, was something like 10,000 words per chapter. And, I think I was working on the Rise of Boker USA chapter, and we wound up cutting that into like 3 chapters, I think, because I just could not stop.
All right.
It's funny, though, if you go through the book, Ricky and I wrote, I would say, almost dead even chapter versus chapter, and you wouldn't know that some of these chapters are written completely by me and some completely by Ricky. It was nice that our writing styles were so similar that if you read through the book, a lot of times when guys collaborate, the writing styles are really different. And Ricky and I just blended so well that you go through the book and you would think that one person wrote the whole book, with shared information, but that wasn't the case at all. I'd write a chapter, he'd write a chapter, I'd write a chapter, he'd write a chapter, and we just put it all together, and it just blended so nicely.
Yeah, very cool.
That's good. I think you guys got pretty lucky on that one, because I was going to ask how you guys ended up collaborating on writing a book together, because it seems like that'd be pretty tough.
It is tough. It's tough writing with other people. I've had the pleasure to write with quite a few guys over the years, and some have gone smooth, some haven't. Some guys are really talented writers, and if that's the case, maybe I'll feed them more information or have them polish up, my work. And on the other hand, I've had some guys that I go, man, this is not good writing, and I don't know, how to gently tell them that maybe let me take the reins on this a little more.
We have to do that with Tom a lot with the podcast.
Yeah.
Let him down easy.
Yeah, let him down easy.
I understand.
Right. Oh, gosh. I don't know if we mentioned the writing of the book. In addition to the many years of research, the writing of the book itself took about 2 years.
Okay.
And that was us working back and forth.
Yep.
He's in Minneapolis, I'm in upstate South Carolina, and it was all done. Well, primarily all done. We would get together from time to time at Blade Show, but we would. It was on the telephone. It was via email, sending manuscripts and documents back and forth.
That's really not that bad, time-wise.
No, actually not at all. I generally figure it takes a minimum of a year to 2 years to write any kind of a decent book. So we did great.
Good job.
Yeah, we very rarely had any of those tough discussions that he was talking about. With the exception of one little specialty chapter I wrote, and I don't know what was going on that day, but I was lost in the symbolism of all of the carvings on some of the old hunting swords and things like this, and I really wrote like 3 pages of crap. And
well, you just got into how you were
You're walking in through the prose and just let it flow.
Right.
Neil was nice enough. He was kind enough not to call it crap. He was just like, you write some really good stuff. This is not what some of my favorite.
Yeah, there you go.
And it was good. It was just kind of way out there for the rest of the book we were writing.
Yeah. That's funny.
Yep.
Well, part of the process, right, of working through it, and
exactly.
I know certainly any stuff I've written, whether it's for work or otherwise, if it's something of length, there's a continuity thing that is you got to keep track of. Otherwise,
that's exactly right.
It sounds weird start to finish, right? Especially if it's written over a long period of time. So.
Yep.
Well, very cool. Thanks for that background, Ricky. I think it helps with people kind of understanding how you got into it, and I think as your first book. Potentially last, but we're just going to call it your first book. I think it's a good perspective for folks to hear. And so, Neil, you've done a number of other knife-related books, right?
Yes, I've done. I guess this is the 5th knife book that I've worked on, produced, and then I did one original book on Daisy BB guns, and it was I, just like Ricky. I come from a family of collectors. Both my parents were collectors of all different stuff. My mom's written some books on antique children's dishes. My dad wrote a book on the GAR, Grand Army of the Republic. And so, like Ricky, I just grew up with just stuff, neat stuff. And the books were just an offshoot of collecting for me. It's just like, hey, it's funny because the Daisy book really I wrote because there was nothing on Daisy BB guns. And I thought, how can there be a company like Harley Davidson and Coca-Cola with nobody's written a book on it? So I thought, well, I'm just dumb enough to try that. And it actually went pretty well. And that book sold over 30,000 copies, believe it or not.
Nice.
Yeah.
Wasn't there a Daisy that was like part of like a youth marksmanship program?
Absolutely.
Peep sights
there were tons of different Daisies. And you're right. There was one that was just dedicated for training kids. But so many different stories about Daisy. And obviously the Christmas story has that famous, Red Ryder shoot your eye out. And that was actually a made up gun. That was never a real gun.
Yeah.
It was made up from, a typical prop gun for a movie.
Yeah.
But Daisy was so neat, and I don't want to get into Daisy, but they were just so neat because they were one of the first companies who really capitalized on advertising. They were the first ones to actually put money back into having a calendar or to paying, some sports figure to say, hey, would you, promote our product? They started buying cartoons, like Little Abner, and using those to promote Daisy. And it was just amazing of what a powerhouse marketing company that was, besides making good product. And with that said, Boker was kind of the same way. Boker, they were, you couldn't pick up a hardware catalog, a flyer from the 1900s right up till now without seeing Boker in there. You'd see Case, Remington, Boker's right in there with them. Companies like Henkel's, a phenomenally great company, but they didn't market, they didn't advertise, they didn't do what they should have done. And that's the reason you see so many Bokers everywhere. They were a great product, but they were also smart in marketing, advertising, promoting their product, getting it in every hardware store that existed. So sometimes it's the marketing as much as it is the product itself.
Yeah, that transition from being a product in the marketplace to being almost like a cultural icon,
household name.
Yeah, that's a huge deal. I think like we did a show about Randall and the Randall family history along with it, and that's a great example of a brand that gained such fame and association with important people and things.
Correct.
Whether wartime or NASA or whatever, and ended up with this aura around the brand that is powerful to this day.
Yep, that's right.
So Neil, you've done a number of these, which means either you're just a huge glutton for punishment, or like you really get something out of it from a personal perspective. So what is it that has motivated you to do these?
Again, like Ricky, I love the history. I love the story behind any item I collect. And, I'm a kid from the 1970s. I grew up, I was riding bicycles and going to Boy Scouts in 1973. 1974, I turned 60 and I went right to motorcycles and muscle cars. But with that, it's like all of a sudden you have these interests. And then if you have parents, like Ricky and I both did that were collectors, it's like they're talking about things. I joined our local knife club called the North Star Blade Collectors in 1981. And I was so fortunate that there were a bunch. There were probably 8 guys that were quite a bit older than me. I was in my early 20s. They were in their 40s, but they were really serious knife collectors. They were going to shows, around the country, and they were good mentors for me. They would tell me, well, here's a good quality knife and here's what you look at. And it wasn't just American stuff. Some of these guys were collecting Sheffield and some were collecting German stuff like Boker and Henkel. So It's like I was lucky enough to be kind of guided by some older guys that were telling me about knives. And that just led to knowing, like Ricky said earlier, well, now that I have the knife, I want to know more about it. So
right.
It leads to searching information, and to me that leads to writing books. It's like I guess I'm like I said, a glutton for punishment. These last knife books, as Ricky can tell you too, we're certainly not getting rich off these. We're lucky to break even after several years, and then after that, you get a few bucks. But we're certainly not doing this for the money. We do it because we love the hobby and love the interesting aspects of the companies.
Yeah, and there's an important piece of it, and we've talked about this a bunch on the show where, these are, and part of the reason we've touched on some of the topics that we have with the show, podcasting isn't durable like a book, but at least there's conversation about things that we think are important for people to know about and understand and remember, and so there's a beautiful durability to the written word where
absolutely
right, these books will be around forever, and it's pretty cool to think that someday somebody's going to pick up one of these books some number of years from now and say, oh yeah, this is history I didn't know anything about, and be able to kind of use it for themselves to kind of understand a little bit more about the industry and all the steps that happen along the way.
Right. They will collect your books. I mean, that's just how it works.
And to be honest, again, I think I could speak for Ricky too when I say that when we write something, I hope that someone builds on this, and I hope if they find mistakes, they'll correct it. I hope that this is just a springboard for other books, other information.
Absolutely, that's the wonderful thing about working on the Boker story. Mark Zaleski's Knife Magazine article in November 2009 was just groundbreaking, really. Before that, Boker collectors had really no information other than the few little engravings of trees that you saw in Goins. And so we feel like this is a big leap forward as far as information for the collector and for the history of the company. And if somebody comes along next year and breaks even more ground and comes out with an even better book, I'll think that's
same here. I'll be the first to congratulate him. Yep.
So does Boker? Did you talk to Boker before writing this, or how does that work when you're putting together a piece about a company and the legality of it?
Honestly, we don't have any connection with Boker at all. But Neil, you may want to tell this story because we did approach them with this to sell them the manuscript before we self-published.
Yep.
And it's pretty interesting.
One thing is that towards the end of World War II, Soligan was just bombed by the Allies. I mean, Boker was flattened to the ground. Almost all the companies were just destroyed. And with that, all their records were destroyed. So a company like Boker, you think, well, you call them and get all the information and the history and the records. They don't have any of that. When Ricky and I started working on the book, I don't know, halfway through, we approached Boker and said, hey, would you like to buy the rights to do this? Otherwise, the funding comes out of the pocket of Ricky and I, and it's pretty expensive to produce a book. You have to pay a layout person, and then the printing cost is really the biggie. So, you have to be prepared to step up, pay that money up front, and then slowly get that back, to cover your costs. So we approached Boker and they hemmed and hawed and then eventually said, nah, no thanks. And I think the reason they did that is because they knew that we're doing the book no matter what. They're going to get the benefit of the promotion for the book. As far as the legality. Yep. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Neil. Their response was interesting, and I still find it humorous.
Exactly.
We're a knife company. We're not a publishing company.
Yeah. Meaning that you put the book out, you pay for the book, and then we'll be happy to carry it, sell it, stock it.
Yep.
But then,
and to their credit, they have been wonderful since it was published.
Absolutely. And then at the end of the book, at the end of finishing the book, we were in contact with a fellow at Boker who put us in contact with a publisher in Germany who said, we're interested in publishing your book in German. Well, that went back and forth and back and forth. And then finally, we sold the rights to that publishing company. Ricky, I forget the name.
I do happen to have this book here. This is...
So as Ricky's looking, basically, we finally struck a deal with this publisher who said that, we'll pay you for the rights. And Ricky and I sold them the rights to publish the book in German. But the problem with that is that they have to relay out the whole book because the German language, first of all, every German word is like about, 900, letters in every word. It's like, my God, their words go on and on and on. So they have to do all the translation, all the layout, and then readjust all the pictures. So basically what we do is we once we agreed on a price, we just sent them what they call the guts of the book, and then they have to reestablish everything. So they did that, and then now Boker in Germany sells that book, which is published in German, and they did a beautiful job.
Oh, nice.
In some ways, there's parts of it that I like better than our book, and the way they laid certain things out. Whoever they had do it did a phenomenal job. We had a great layout guy who was a friend of mine, and I think it turned out really nice. But the way they did it, they took a little different approach, and some of their layouts are really, really gorgeous.
Very cool.
Published by Weiland Verlag.
There, thank you. Yep, Weiland Publishing in Germany.
Okay.
And so what happened was that Weiland basically had to get an agreement from Boker, and I don't know what that agreement was, and I don't know what they paid, but basically Boker said, okay, look, we will promise to buy so many books if you publish it. But that means that Boker still didn't put any money up. Weiland still had to front the money to us and then pay for the translation, pay for the layout, pay for all the printing costs. So they had a huge amount of money into it. And then Boker would have said, okay, then we'll take whatever, 1,000 books right up front. And then if we sell those, we'll take more. And again, I'm just throwing numbers out. I have no idea, but I know there was some arrangement with Boker and Weiland. But our dealings were strictly with this Weiland. Again, we had no dealings with Boker, just with Weiland. Yeah.
Yeah. Huh.
And this book was self-published? You guys did this yourself?
We did this ourselves, correct, Ricky and I, and then I, like I said, I had a layout guy who'd done one other book for me, and that book actually won a couple of national book awards. It was a previous book, but this guy is phenomenally good. He owned a graphics company. He's retired, but just a great old friend of mine, and did the first book, and then I hounded him to do this Boker book. So, but it was fun.
Well, when I was younger, my dad is a writer, or I guess was a writer for, that was his job for, I don't know, all his life. But
very neat.
His first books were self-published. And
yep.
I know then it was pretty rough. This was the 80s and, the 90s and through that. And is it a lot easier now? Do you distribute yourself, or do you find like Amazon, or how's that work? I'm just kind of curious.
You basically have really two options. You can go through a publisher, but if you go through a publisher, they give you generally roughly 8% of wholesale cost of the book. So if a book sells for $30, you get 8% of $15. So you can imagine there's not much money in that. But the thing is that they take care of all the printing costs. You basically give them your layout, and then they take it from there. So they print it, they advertise it, they sell it, they distribute it, and then you get that, pennies on the dollar, royalty checks. And I've done that way too, and it's okay. If you self-publish, then obviously you're getting all the money from the book, but then you have to do all the work of the advertising, setting up a website, and then obviously distributing all the books. I'm just barely into the technical world. I'm so lucky that Ricky was so much more clever in the technical world than I was when this Boker book came out, that Ricky set up a wonderful website, and he's taking care of distributing most of the books. And then I've sold some at shows and to other places. Since my last book, I've done what Ricky did, and I've set up my own website, and I've jumped into that pool, which was kind of scary for me, an old guy from like I said, growing up in the 70s. This is all new to me, but it was a good experience, and it's still a lot of work because you do have to really promote your book, your product. You got to go on shows like this, and you have to, go to knife shows, and you have to have a website, and there's a lot of self-promotion if you want to try to move any books at all.
Yeah. You got to have a little hustle.
You got to have a little hustle. And it's not so bad once you do it, but it's still work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe we probably need to dive into the Boker timeline and stuff. And then maybe at some point, if we don't scare these guys off, maybe Neil can come back and talk to us more about the knife book process or the book process in general. Because I think we have some listeners that might be interested in that stuff and are actually decent writers and other stuff. And maybe one or two of us have interest in it too. So we'll have to talk more about that one.
Sure.
But yeah, we'll dig into that later. So okay, Boker history. Let's go right to the meat and potatoes of it. Do you guys want to walk a timeline with us, or what do you think is the right way to do this? It looks like the book is laid out in basically a timeline kind of a fashion.
I'm going to let Ricky jump in because he's got a better memory than I do, and if I can jump in and add some bits or help out, but I'd rather let Ricky drive the bus on the storyline of the book.
Well, we can probably hit the high points.
Yeah.
There's I told you about my tendency to run on.
Run away, pal.
We'll shoot you along, Ricky. We're not.
That's right. You run and we'll follow.
Tom's not here, so we might have to be mean to you instead of Tom. So we apologize in advance for that. But
hey, I've been married 36 years, so I'm used to that.
You can't hurt my feelings, he said.
That's right.
So we know that Boker, the Boker family, has been active in making cutlery back into the 1600s in the Remscheid area. We only went back probably mid 1700s with Gottfried Boker. He is a self-taught cutler, and he made blades and sheaths for the military there during the 7 Years' War. And there have been a few iterations. There's little scraps of information that were discovered. 1829, a couple of Boker brothers, Herman and Robert, who were sons of Johann Boker. They formed the H&R Boker Cutlery Company in Solingen. But the big thing for me, the big point in the timeline for me was in 1837 when Herman Boker traveled to the United States and started a business in New York called the Herman Boker Company. It was located at John Street.
Big milestone.
And that was the when Boker hit the U.S. and they started using the famous tree trademark in the U.S. at that time. We found some copyright information that was dated in 1890s, but it did make mention of the fact that H. Boker and Company had been using the tree brand logo since 1837 in the U.S.
What was behind that logo? Did they ever say?
Yes, actually, there was a. I'm going to state the obvious here. There was a tree.
Chestnut tree.
There was a chestnut tree that grew in front of the first factory, the first Boker factory, and they used that for their logo.
I like it.
Of course, it was in the U.S. A lot of times if you mention Boker pocket knife, they don't know who you're talking about. But if you say tree brand, a lot of the old guys, they really recognize that tree brand logo. The old chestnut tree got struck by lightning in 1925, and a local artist there in Solingen, he took a piece of the wood from that tree and he carved a representation of the old chestnut tree I believe it's still hanging in the offices of H. Heinrich Boker in Solingen now.
Oh, very cool.
So
Maybe as an overall thing, we're going to hear that Boker name over and over and over again because, like you guys said, this is a family company.
yeah, it certainly is.
Right? Okay.
That's right. And there were other family members who traveled in. Robert Boker went to Canada and formed a company there to distribute Boker knives. He later removed down to Mexico City, where he was known as Roberto. And Roberto Boker started a hardware company there in Mexico City that it was known for many generations as the Sears and Roebuck of Mexico.
Casa Boker.
Casa Boker is the name of it, yes. So the Boker company, I say in many ways they're a United States story too, a United States success story, a part of the United States history, because H. Boker and Company supplied swords, accoutrements, rifles to the U.S. during the U.S. Civil War.
They were in the top 10 suppliers of swords to the Federal Army during the Civil War. And Ricky and I have some paperwork that were direct correspondence from Boker to Abraham Lincoln, going back and forth, telling him how many swords they would want. But I've got some other records that show that I want to say they were like 5th or 6th overall in supplying the quantity of swords to the American federal, part of the Civil War, which is just amazing, thinking these are coming from Germany.
Yeah.
Were any of those marked, or was this
Yes,
basically
absolutely. Well, they were marked H. Boker. There's one in the book. I'm lucky enough to own one. They aren't that uncommon. I mean, if you start searching Civil War swords, it's not terribly difficult to run across an H. Boker cavalry sword, a curved cavalry sword.
Huh. So one of the things I noticed looking at the timeline in the book is there is a lot of mention of, they formed companies for the sons, or they split off and made other companies and that sort of stuff. But it sounds like it was all centralized around Boker knives and the distribution of those knives. Is that right? I mean, aside from, you mentioned the Mexico situation where it was almost more like a
hardware store.
Yeah, exactly. Hardware store or sundries or whatever you want to call it. But did it all was kind of centered back to that main spine of knife stuff?
I think so. And, my memory's failing me as I age. But I don't remember it actually being stated explicitly. But I just kind of got the feeling throughout the whole research process that much of the reason for being of Herman Boker and Company and Casa Boker was for the distribution of the Boker family product that was in Solingen.
Correct. Yeah, but it wasn't until 1899 that they were making knives in America. But Ricky's right. They were primarily cutlers, but they also produced hardware. So you'll find tools, you'll find stamps, you'll find, pliers, a lot of stuff that and oddly enough, that was another brand of Boker. There were another Boker family yet who only produced hardware. And I don't believe Boker ever produced guns, but they certainly repped guns. I've got a catalog, a Boker catalog from about 1865 that shows flintlocks, pistols, and rifles in there. But I'm very certain that Boker didn't make them. They were just, wholesaling them, representing them, for America and for their retailers, like Ricky said.
Yeah.
Right.
It makes sense if you're going to set up that. I mean, if I think about it in a modern context anyway, if you're going to set up an operation to do distribution of that kind of stuff,
Right.
logical that you would also distribute other things related to it,
Absolutely.
whether it's
That's
for
right.
the military or sporting or otherwise, but
Yep.
stuff that goes along with it, because then you can, it all just makes more sense from a business perspective.
Exactly.
Going out west, you get a shovel and a knife.
Yep.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. You need tools. Keep your stuff rolling.
And then you break those, and you got to get another shovel and another knife.
Yes, that's exactly.
So there's no end to the tools and knives that were being sold. They were being used up hard, and boy, we need more.
So
There you go.
So where does was it John Boker that you were talking about earlier?
Yes, John R. Boker.
Where does he fit into this?
He, I may have to thumb through the pages here.
You don't have your book memorized? Oh, my goodness.
That's terrible, isn't it?
That's half the reason I write books, is because I can't remember all the
there you
information
go.
that I've sorted out. I'm going to my own books all the time, not out of vanity, because I don't remember what I said.
I think Birch just skipped about 50 years in the timeline. Come on, man.
Yeah, working our way up to him.
Yeah.
Okay.
Some
Keep
of the
going.
other highlights. 1899 was about the year that I consider Boker USA to have
Yes.
started, because that's when Boker knife manufacture in the United States started. They tied in with Valley Forge knives, and in 1899 they opened a new factory in 1921, and it was then Newark, New Jersey, I believe.
Yep.
So they made both Boker knives and Valley Forge knives. If some of your listeners are familiar with that particular label,
And they're
in
still
the same
selling
facility.
German branded knives at the same time. So it's kind of interesting that
Right.
Boker is selling both American and German made knives, and you might see them both in the same catalog. They were usually labeled as German made or American made, and a lot of the models were similar, some were totally different, but it was just interesting that you have one company selling knives from two different countries, in a same hardware catalog or retail catalog.
Yeah.
Right, and I'm sorry, that's one of the unique things about Boker. I don't know if there was any other cutlery company that did this, but during World War I and World War II, you had the same company, basically, different families in different countries manufacturing knives for the military of the two different warring political parties.
Yeah, isn't that strange?
So
Yeah.
Boker made the Mark I Navy knife during World War I think, and the Mark III fighting knife in World War II. And meanwhile, their German cousins were making the knives there for the soldiers in Germany.
Right.
So I found that really interesting. But
The U.S. manufacturing piece of was that maybe this is something that came out of your research, but was that a situation where we can make the knives more affordable if we manufacture them in the U.S. because there was resources and stuff to be able to do so, or was there another manufacturing related reason to start up a second site?
A lot of it had to do with the tariffs.
Right.
In 1891, the American cutlers were basically going to Congress and saying, hey, these Germans and English are bringing in knives too cheap. Their labor rates are too cheap. You have to start putting tariffs on European knives and other goods, to quell that great amount of knives coming in. So I think Boker really, one of their main reasons in opening up this branch and taking over Valley Forge was to say, hey, if you're going to start putting all these restrictions on us, we're going to open up a company or a corporation here and sell American products, even though they were Boker, they're American made, and get around that tariff thing.
Interesting. I think actually didn't Grace Horn hit on that?
Yes.
She did, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, that's interesting. Okay.
With that said, it's kind of funny because, England, from the mid 1800s through the late 1800s, England was supplying knives to America like crazy. Well, by the late 1800s, they were fading away and Germany was coming on really strong. They were bringing in German knives, by the gazillions, and they were kind of taking the place, not in quality, but in quantity from the Germans. And there again, that's when the American cutlers really, said, you have to slow this down somehow.
Okay, so in this case, it's kind of an expansion. It's a little bit like the transplant car companies, right? Like, okay, well, it's better for business if we open a manufacturing site.
Oh, absolutely.
In the U.S.
Yes.
That helps us fit in. Maybe like you said,
covering more bases. That's right.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay.
That's a large part of it, and this really came in handy during World War I because all of the cutlery manufacturing in Germany was it was tasked with manufacturing military wares, so they didn't have any available capacity to send pocket knives to the U.S. at the time.
Right.
So the only representative of the Boker company and the Boker family in the U.S. during the time of World War I was there in New York and New Jersey. Pretty much same thing leading up to World War II. In 1935, U.S. Congress passed several laws forbidding doing business with countries who were participants in this war. So the U.S. restricted the imports of German goods leading up to the time of World War II. Is interesting. That's about the time that the labeling on the U.S. knives up until that time, they were just labeled as Boker or H. Boker, and it was really difficult to tell the difference between the American and the German-made Boker knives. But leading up to World War II, Boker USA started putting that information on their tang stamps of their knives. Yep. They actually read Boker USA.
Yeah. Okay. I was going to ask about that in that time frame when the American manufacturing started for Boker. Was there culturally a difference from the buyer perspective of, oh, I want a German-made Boker because it's higher quality, or I want an American-made Boker because it's an American-made knife, or the American-made knife is higher quality? Was there any of that was part of the picture at all? It sounds like it was really more a business thing in dealing with the tariff aspect of it than anything else, at least at the beginning.
I don't think the average guy knew the difference. I think they just said Boker, and Boker always had a good reputation. And even when you talk to modern day collectors, everybody says, oh, Boker made a good knife. Ricky, what do you think?
Oh yeah, I agree. That's the feeling I get. And it's interesting the way that carries over to modern day. Boker is still an international company. They have several different levels of quality.
Yep, that's right.
Currently, they're making their higher end cutlery at the Zollingen factory. The working man's knife, I guess you would call it, with the stag handles and that kind of thing, are being made in Argentina primarily currently. They're also making knives all over the world, sourced all over the place under the Boker Plus trade name, and
for lower price points.
Right. Well, in most cases, I think this is where most of their interesting new designs are coming from now, too.
That's true.
In the Boker Plus line, because they're sourced in Taiwan, China, Italy, and the U.S.
Yeah.
And then they've got their cheapest, the Boker Magnum name. All those are Asian sourced, but it's, they're generally, if somebody's looking for a cheap knife to work with, they'll go towards the Magnum name brand.
Right. It's smart to be very diverse in your offerings.
It is.
Right. But that's the thing. Most people don't necessarily differentiate between those 4 different divisions. It's all Boker.
Right.
Yeah.
And how did they used to say their premium line? It was like Jagdmesser.
Oh,
Maybe
the
you guys can-
Jagdmester. Yes.
How do you pronounce it?
Oh, gosh. I would butcher it, I'm sure.
Spell it, Michael, if you can remember.
I can spell the Messer part.
It's Jagdmesser.
Oh, Jagdmesser. Yeah, and
Okay.
and really that just means hunting knife. It wasn't really a premier line. It just meant if you had a Jagdmesser, and I don't know that I'm pronouncing it right either, but that just usually meant either folding hunting or fixed blade hunting knife. So it just
okay.
kind of reference to an outdoor, outdoor using knife.
Okay. Well, thank you. Yeah, I need to know much, much more.
All right, so we get to 1939. There's legislation that forbids the German product stuff, right? So the Boker USA thing ends up going on the knives as part of, hey, we're compliant and we're not we're not the guys that you want to be mad at. They're made here. It's good, right?
Right.
And so where do things go from there?
In World War II, of course, the tree brand trademark was stripped by the U.S. from the Boker company. Of course, Neil mentioned earlier that the primary manufacturing facility in Solingen was bombed and destroyed. I think this was probably around December of 1944 when many of the bombing raids were going after the German infrastructure.
Right.
We were heading towards Berlin. So the Boker factory was totally destroyed. After the war, John Boker, who was the son of Hans Boker, who was president of Boker USA in the 1920s. So John, very intelligent guy. After the war, he took the reins of Boker USA. He was primarily responsible for getting that trademark back for the Boker family and the Boker company. And it's a lot of people don't realize nowadays just what that tree logo means to the Boker family. I get the impression that it's not just their company identity, it's their family identity.
Absolutely. Huge name brand. I wanted to bring up, too, just a little bit earlier, there was an interesting thing back in 1914, or actually around 1915, Remington was, gearing up to produce knives, and they basically stole Boker's best cutler in the American branch.
J.W. Tillman.
Carl Tillman, exactly. and with that, Remington produced some models, Acorn models, some other models that were dead, ringers for existing Boker models. And I got to think there was some really hard feelings at Boker that, not only did Remington steal their top guy, their best mechanic, their lead foreman, but they took some of their knives, styles and the Acorn logo along with it. So I always thought that would have been a real contentious time period, was that 1915 era, and then up until Remington started around 1919. So,
Yeah, Michael Birch has a sore spot for that kind of stuff. I can hear his pencil scratching on the page, crossing off Remington things on it.
Thinking about my bullet knives.
There you go.
Yeah. How you like them now, pal?
Not as much anymore. I just didn't hear any of that.
Yeah. Dang.
To go along with that, Remington had a beautiful, what I call a humpback camper model, a 6-blade model, and it's got that little humpback and the corkscrew and the awl in the back. And a lot of people think that Boker came out with that first, and that's not the case. That's actually a model that Remington came out with in 1923, and then Boker copied it in 1930. So that's one of the few times when I think Remington actually had an idea first, when you're just talking about Remington and Boker, that Remington came out with this iconic model. And to be fair, Remington didn't invent that model. That model was around, years and years before with other German and other cutlery firms, but Remington was the one who really made it popular, and then right away Boker, made it a few years later, and that's been a mainstay for Boker also, throughout time. Just kind of an iconic design.
Guess we're not getting that Remington ad.
Yep.
Yeah, cross them off the potential sponsors list. I get you. Okay, so John Boker, after the war, gets the family mark back, which is probably the right way to say it, right? As much as the company mark, gets the tree logo back. And at that point, after the war, he is kind of headfirst into that industry. And does he, help run the company at that point, or work as a key player in the company, or what was the situation?
He does. He was hands-on with that corporation. Gosh, I forget when he retired, but I think probably when they sold the company is when he retired.
Okay.
And that was the times of some tough years for Boker. In the 50s, they bought the George Schrade Knife Company in Bridgeport, Connecticut. And then, of course, in 1958, that turned out to be not such a good purchase because federal law was passed against switchblade knives.
They bought the George Schrade Company primarily because of the Schrade switchblades, like Ricky just said. And they bought it in 1956, not knowing that 2 years later the federal ban would hit, and then they basically just folded it up. But they lost a huge amount of money. I actually talked to Bill Schrade at a few different knife shows, and Bill Schrade is a descendant of George Schrade, a grandson, and he kind of confirmed that story and said, "Oh, Boker took a horrible hit on that. They lost just an ungodly amount of money. They had paid so much for the Schrade name and only used it for basically 2 years, and then had to flush it."
Yeah.
So kind of sad.
Yeah, it really was.
Huh.
It really was. Boker nowadays, I know a lot of folks look at him as like, maybe blue collar knife. And honestly, I guess that's the way they looked at themselves too. They made working knives. They really didn't focus on what's the future collector going to think about this, and
right.
How are we going to make sure everybody knows what year this was made and all this. They didn't think about the collector at all. They were making knives for use, for hard use, and therein lies part of the difficulty about collecting Boker knives is they would reuse tang stamps. Even today, they still do that. They'll reuse a tang stamp. So that's part of the difficulty in collecting a Boker knife. But Boker USA itself went through some difficulties starting in the 60s. In 1965, Boker USA was purchased by the New Britain Machine Company. Then 3 years later, New Britain Corporation, along with Boker, are all absorbed into Litton Industries. 2 years later, 1970, Boker is acquired by J. Wiss and Sons. I may not be saying that right. It may be Weiss. But the scissors manufacturer,
Okay.
J. Weiss and Sons. 6 years later, in 1976, they were acquired by Cooper Industries. And now you really see why there's difficulty in tracking anything down in the U.S. as well. I mean, to be sold this many times in just a couple of decades, so much of the paperwork from the U.S. Boker USA Corporation was lost as well.
Yeah. So were knives during that period where they were kind of being tossed around between parent companies, were they actually still producing knives through that period?
They were, but to me, the quality of the knives went down, and of course, I think quality and craftsmanship in general went down in the 70s.
Yeah.
You went from having these, the American made. You went from having these really, really beautiful bone-handled knives where the fit and finish was just excellent to in the mid-'60s. It became Delrin, the fake stag-looking things.
Okay.
And that's primarily the handle material that Boker USA used from, say, the mid to late 60s up until they ceased production in the U.S. in the 1980s.
Okay.
As Delrin goes, it was pretty good, but it certainly was not bone or stag.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think that Boker was being hit by two things. One is that, after World War II, there were almost no more good trained cutlers, especially, in an industry like that.
Right.
And then the other thing was the Asian market was just coming on strong, selling stuff for dirt cheap. And I think that's why Boker kept getting sold, was that there was no big profit in them. So a company would own them and say, well, my God, we're not making any money. Dump the company. Somebody else would buy them, have them a couple of years, and still just not turning a profit.
Yeah. The timeline makes it look like that Schrade deal
exactly
kind of started the whole decline.
Yep.
And put them in that spot where they had difficulty. Okay. And maybe the thing for people to remember who are listening and trying to kind of follow along with this is this trials and tribulations we're talking about are really specific to the branch, the Boker USA piece of it. All the meanwhile, in Germany, they're still making knives, still a company that's, producing product and assumed to be profitable, doing their thing, right?
Correct.
This is
Correct.
a parallel
and they
path.
still have outlets around the world. They're still selling to other countries. There's still some German knives coming to America. The problem with the German knives coming to America is that they were probably pretty expensive compared to both the American and mostly anything else.
Yeah.
And Ricky, I don't know about you, but I don't think the German quality dropped off too much, but you definitely see a lot less German-made knives, in that 70s, 80s era here in America.
Right. I think the German cutlers continued to make a really nice knife.
Yeah.
After World War II.
Yep.
Okay.
As a matter of fact, all of the nicer knives that were sold in the USA, starting in 1971, when they started doing the limited edition knives, Boker really kind of started that short run collector focus knife in 1971. Now, short run for 1971 was still, say, 10,000 knives, which is
yeah, right.
tremendous nowadays.
Yep.
Yeah. So in this kind of time frame where they're on this parallel path, is there a business relationship between Boker USA and Boker in Germany? Maybe that's not something that's known or obvious, or were they really completely acting like separate companies that happen to share a common family name?
No, they really kept the family ties close. From my research, the only time that I saw the Boker USA attempt to separate themselves from their German cousins were during the time of World War II and immediately thereafter.
Yeah.
Even up until like the very early 1950s, you didn't see the tree logo on very many of the USA-made knives. They actually came out with a new logo that read Razor Brand.
Huh.
Now, they still had the Boker USA tang stamp. and you would see the occasional tree. But it was almost like just looking at the knives and looking at the catalogs at the time, it was like they were still trying to separate themselves from their German cousins up until, say, mid-1950s.
Yep. And throughout the bulk of the 1900s, they were two separate companies. They were joined by blood, but the German company didn't own the American company. They were a separate, independent company.
Right.
Yeah, right.
The U.S. Branch of the family basically acted as a distributor for the German-made knives.
Right. Okay.
On up until they stopped making the brand in the U.S. And even thereafter, it's funny. One of the odd things you'll find as a collector of Boker knives, the final years of American production, they actually moved down into Georgia, and they had a factory. They bought a building that was formerly a cotton mill, very close to Savannah, Georgia. And the last 2 to 3 years of U.S. Boker knife production was there in Georgia. After they shut that plant down, a lot of the blades that already had the Tang stamp on them and the handle material found its way to Solingen, Germany, where they were repurposed, reused, and it's a neat little artifact if you can find it in the from knives made in the mid 1980s. You'll find a knife that has a Boker USA Tang stamp, but has a Boker Solingen, Germany blade edge.
Just really funny to see. Yeah.
Yeah.
And you say, so is this American or German? Well, yes, it is.
Yeah, right. So yeah, that back to that point that, okay, they're really these parallel companies, and realistically the business need to not look like a German knife company because it was in a time of extreme nationalism, right, with World War II, and having any tie to a German company was not very popular, certainly, right?
Well, it's funny because that's true and it's also not true. If you read a little history, when they sent some Germans here to work on farms, prisoners from World War II, those guys were accepted and treated so well, unlike the Japanese, that I don't know that Americans held the hostility to Germany that they did. Obviously Hitler's a bad guy, but the Germans themselves, there were too many German people here that said, well, those are my cousins, my relatives. So I don't know that there was ever a real animosity against Boker knives during either one of the two world wars.
Interesting. So Boker in the end ends up being owned by somebody, right? Before Boker USA, before they ceased production. Who held them at the very end there?
Cooper Industries, Cooper Tool Group, based in Apex, North Carolina, was the last corporate owner. Okay.
And they're the ones that owned that factory in Georgia that ended up eventually closing its doors.
Right.
So when the operation ceased, from a manufacturing perspective, I assume there was still some interest or desire to distribute Boker, German-made Boker knives here in the U.S. So kind of what happened with that part of it? Did Cooper, including the manufacturing operation that they had that eventually closed, did Cooper also do the distribution piece as well for German Boker?
They did until they stopped manufacturing.
Okay.
There's an interesting little sideline of Boker collecting. After in 1984, after Boker stopped manufacturing knives in the U.S., there was actually a partnership between Boker Solingen and a
United Cutlery
purchasing group. Yes, they created United Boker, and you'll see a few knives that have this United Boker Tang stamp. Funny looking logo that has a small little tree in the middle of it, but a big globe is a combination of the United Cutlery logo and the Boker logo. And United Cutlery, I don't know if you're familiar with them.
Yeah.
David Hall
Blue
from
Ridge
Blue
and
Ridge
Smoky
Knives. Yeah. Kevin Pipes from Smoky Mountain. They formed this United Cutlery as a purchasing company primarily.
Right.
And, you know, in the early 1980s, there was basically a global recession. I honestly haven't seen numbers. It was a private company, so you don't really know profit and loss of Boker at the time. But some of the research I did, they appeared to be struggling like so many other companies during the early 1980s.
Yeah, they had to have been.
And, right. I mean, their primary distributor there in Cooper Tools really was no longer distributing knives in the U.S., so they had to have another representative. And so this partnership with these guys started out with a purchase of like 10,000 knives in a red jigged bone handle. But some of the United Boker knives of the time are pretty neat.
They're great knives. And United Cutlery also brought back the Henkel's knives, which were actually made by Boker. So there's a whole story about that. But I think that United Cutlery actually did a good job in kind of helping both Boker and Henkel's and giving them, you know, a venue to sell their product and bringing them back into the mainstream. So I think personally they did a lot of good for both those companies.
I think so too. And they had, I think it was about a 10-year relationship.
Yep.
From the mid 80s to the mid 90s. In 1986, Boker did open up a distribution center, which they now call Boker USA, in Colorado. And that's the U.S. headquarters for Boker Knives now.
So
that's controlled by the German Boker company.
It is, yes.
Yeah.
So before they were independent companies, but now it says Boker USA, but they're really under the control of the German branch, the German Boker branch.
Okay. More like a U.S. global arm of Boker.
Yeah, right. They're
correct.
Yep. Subsidiary, you know.
There you go. Yep.
American branch. Yep.
Okay. And that's incredibly common across the globe today.
Sure.
Right?
Sure.
Very common situation. And certainly if we had some sudden tariff situation like they had experienced, you know, early on, things would change, right?
Yep. That's right.
We've seen companies do that before. So.
Right.
Right.
All right. Interesting. So is there more to the Boker story that we want to hit on?
One of the ending time frames is that, you know, 2019, you know, Boker celebrated their 150th anniversary, which is kind of a big deal.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's kind of cool.
Yeah, that's a long run.
That's a long run. No kidding.
So kind of an interesting thing. So the folks that the Boker name in the U.S., the part of Boker that ran, you know, into the 80s, were there still, it sounds like there were Boker family members in the U.S. involved in the company up until that final closure. Is that true, or did they kind of slowly exit the picture as all of those different transitions happened with different ownership?
Ricky, wasn't John really running Casa Boker?
I tell you the truth, that's one of the details that
I don't know that
I've forgotten.
Any Boker family members were in charge of anything in America. You know, after the early 1900s. I guess Ricky and I'd have to go back and dig through our notes.
Yeah, up until probably the buyout in the mid 1960s, when New Britain bought them out, I think they started phasing out.
Yeah.
The Weiss family when they purchased it, I think it was primarily their family members. And there's one of the Weiss family now. I think his name is Henry, who has an excellent webpage on those guys, the scissors manufacturers, and I shared some of my Boker catalogs with him during that time, and he's posted them online. So it's a great resource there. I wish I could remember the name of the webpage. I'd share it with you. But if you do a search for J. Weiss catalogs, I'm sure it'll be one of the first things to pop up on Google.
When people look for J. Weiss, they're looking for J.Wiss. Is that the name they're searching for? Okay. Yeah,
that's correct.
Yeah, I've always said Wiss myself.
Okay.
I've always associated the Wiss snips. They always made great tin snips.
Yeah.
Right.
So.
All right. Well, very cool. So we went kind of through the overall timeline for Boker. For folks that are interested in the book, because there's tons more, obviously, with 170 some pages in this book. What kind of things could people expect to see when they buy the book, in addition to this kind of historical stuff?
I'd like to think,
are gonna. Hey, go ahead, Neil.
Oh, I was going to say, I would like to think that you would see an incredible, well-rounded package of not just the history of the company, but also so many great models. And I think Ricky and I did a great job of talking about some of the, great patterns, Barlow's and Campers and gentleman's knives. There's all these individual chapters and hunting fixed blade knives. So, obviously the collectors out there, they tend to go into a certain type of knife. So I think the book covers so many different, categories along with the history that I hate to brag, but I think it's a great book. And thanks to Ricky for making it such a great book.
Oh, thanks to you. One of my favorite things about the book is the photography. A lot of books like this, you go through them and you're just like, this does not look good. But Neil had a great photographer working with us.
Yep.
The layout is fantastic. And of course, one of my favorite parts of this book is the identification section. At the back, we've reproduced an updated version of Mark Zaleski's Tang stamp chart.
Yep.
Which is one of the best resources out there for identifying and dating Boker knives. There's a section there that shows the different shields and when the different shields were used, different blade etches, and when these different blade etches were used by Boker knives. And just kind of an aside, if you're trying to identify your Boker knife and you see this reverse blade etching that Boker is known for, that was only done at their facility in Germany. You don't really see that on any of the American-made knives. So if you're trying to identify where your knife was made and you've got this reverse blade etch, that'll be a Zollingen-made knife. So I like that. At the very end of the book, and this is not exhaustive, but the last, say, 10 pages or so, you'll find pattern numbers, a short description, what type of handle material was used, and what years those were made. And after studying Boker knives for as long as I have, I've just about decided probably the best way to identify when a Boker knife was made is by the handle material. Strange.
Yeah. No, that like you said, this section at the end that has that reference stuff in it with the marks and the shields, and then that crazy pattern section. People my age will definitely need their readers for that because it's very fine print, but like you said, really, really cool information. And for people that want to dig into it, super helpful, I think, to be able to nail some of that stuff down.
Absolutely. And if you really want to be more precise on dating stuff, you can't just go by one thing. You can't say, oh, this is the shield or this tank stamp. You really have to put a bunch of this stuff together to really pinpoint when a knife was made. So, and that back section most of the back stuff Ricky put together, which is, it would really stress me to go through the detail that he went through to put a lot of this together. But it's so important if you really want to be accurate.
Yeah, as a fellow super nerd engineer for hire, I absolutely embrace Ricky's nerding out in the pattern chart. It's fantastic.
Yep, that's right.
It's funny, and I literally have a stack of old catalogs that is a foot tall, and I went through every one. I identified every knife pattern in there. And that section actually was longer than that to start with.
It was way longer.
I mentioned it that what's in the book is not exhaustive.
Yeah.
But we picked the most popular patterns and the patterns that you're most likely to see nowadays.
Right.
I think it was probably 16, 18, 20 pages long when I started. And we pared it down a little bit.
Yeah.
Because this company's been around for a long time. They've made a lot of knives.
Yeah, 150 years is crazy.
Yeah, 150 years just in America. That's, you go back even further if you're talking about the German branch just by itself.
Right. Well, the book certainly gets my endorsement. There's a really fantastic collection of really nice color photos and historical photos, and I assume what look like sections of some of the great catalog material that you guys have amassed over time. It's a really, really nice presentation of the information, and I think it's a really cool way to walk through a bunch of the timeline we talked about with a whole bunch of additional detail, and the knives really tell the story, I think, right up behind this whole thing. It's sort of academic to go through just the timeline and the steps. And I think when you color it in by putting in the knives themselves, I think it'll really help people get a better feel for kind of what this all means.
Yep.
Right.
I'm amazed, kind of on a sideline here, I'm amazed that if you want to know about Harley Davidson, if you want to know about Corvette, almost anything else, there's gazillions of books. But in general, there's not a lot of books on an awful lot of cutlery. Germany, there's basically nothing, and England, very little. Even America, there's so many great companies that haven't been covered, haven't been researched. K-Bar comes to mind, Cattaraugus. I mean, there's so many great companies. New York Knife Company. There's so many companies that there's no definitive work written on them, and I hope that we can encourage other people out there to say, you know what, I'm going to pick one of these and I'm going to tackle it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sure. Everybody, listen, if I can do it, anybody can do it.
That's what I say, man. Yep.
You get Ricky's full endorsement.
Yes.
There you go.
Yep.
Sean and Michael, do you guys have any questions? I think we're kind of wrapping this thing up. We got to talk about where people can find the book, but did you guys have any other questions about the timeline or specific Boker things that you wanted to know about?
Just one important question. We got to know, if you had to pick one, what's your absolute favorite model?
Ricky?
Boker 182. The
Bam.
Yeah, humpback
the
camper.
6-blade camp knife.
Yep.
Nice.
I would go for one of the German style campers. I'm not sure which. There's just so many great models. That's a rotten question to ask.
Of course.
Yeah, we know it's impossible. That's why we ask it.
To be honest, I'd almost say one of my favorites, if you look on the front cover, there's a pearl dog knife. And it's just so cool because here's this lying dog that some phenomenally great cutler carved out by hand. And it's got multi blades. You'll see it inside the book, but it's just like, I look at that and I go, oh my God, that took a lot of skill to make that.
Yes. Yeah, that's a really cool example.
Yep.
Very nice. And the one next to it that looks like it has like a figured or burlwood handle, is that?
That's the 182 that Ricky just mentioned.
Okay.
Yep.
And that is a chestnut handle on that one. That one came out
chestnut.
for the 140-year anniversary.
Yeah.
Oh, very cool.
Beautiful, beautiful knife.
Are some or all of the knives pictured in the book, are those from your collection, Ricky, or are some of these on loan, or?
Every knife in this book was either in my collection or Neil's collection.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Wow.
My focus was primarily post World War II stuff.
Yeah.
And Neil has the good stuff.
Not the good stuff. We mix some phenomenal great knives in here.
Yeah.
I was surprised, when Ricky and I compared all of our notes originally, that we both had, like Ricky said, we both had piles of information, literature, brochures. And even though we had some common stuff, we had so much stuff that there was, we could fill in each other's gaps. It's like, oh, you've got this from 1953. And we really were going year by year, and even year by year, we'd have to have, multiples to show more models that wouldn't be necessarily shown in one catalog or one hardware store.
Yeah.
So that was really fun for me, was to compare all the stuff from the late 1800s right up until, current time. And, look at all the literature.
Yeah, very cool.
Yeah, Boker, as a matter of fact, I was just looking at the new catalog, but Boker for 2021, they've come out with they call it their swell end jackknife. I forget the model number, but it's a spear point blade with a swedge, just old school. The secondary blade is a bottle cap opener, and they're making it in 3 different handle materials. They're doing a thuya wood. They're doing a green colored burl wood. And they have a synthetic material that looks so much like the old buffalo horn of the early 1900s.
Well, I know what site I'm going to after we wrap this up.
That one's on my wish list.
Yeah.
Yeah, very cool. I think, there's a lot of modern collectors and modern knife people who think about Boker, and what they have in their head is very specifically the Boker Plus stuff, right? Or the Boker Magnum stuff.
Right.
And that's kind of what they associate with the Boker name. And,
right.
And so for those folks, they're going to hear Boker knife book, and they're going to think of a bunch of Boker Plus, super thin pocket tactical wannabe kind of knives. And this book is really more traditional slip joint, camp knife, fixed blade. There's so much more in this Boker history thing that is really cool and worth looking at, that I think maybe some modern knife enthusiasts would be surprised by, understanding that piece of it. So if you like those kind of knives, there's tons of that in this book. There's some of the more modern stuff in here too, right? A little bit snippets of it toward the later part of the book, but there's a lot of really cool stuff in here for people that love traditional knives and fixed blades.
And especially with, GEC, doing so well these last few years, and a huge following of traditional patterns, I would think that people would like seeing, these Boker patterns that are, a lot like these GECs that just sell out like crazy.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. We've had a couple of modern traditional slip joint makers on the show, and there's been a crazy resurgence in that stuff the last number of years. And it's been really cool to see, because
it is.
You see people who never would have considered a knife like that. I was absolutely one of those guys, right? That's my grandfather's knife. That's not what I want. And then, now I have like 20 or 30 nice custom slip joint knives, right?
Good. Cool.
It just happens, right? So,
where
can people find the book? Where do they get it from?
Well, there's a few locations. You can buy it directly on the Boker USA website. You can also get it from Knife Magazine. They're selling it for us. You can find the German version on the German Amazon site.
Oh, really?
We haven't really tried to place any on Amazon here in the U.S. But the primary location you want to get these is at our webpage, www.thebokerbook.com.
Okay.
That's what we would love, because then, because we obviously, if we sell it to somebody else like Knife Magazine, and I love Knife Magazine, I write for them, but when you buy it from them, then they've already taken a cut off of us to supply the book. So,
sure.
Be great if you buy it from us, but if you buy it from Knife Magazine, that's fine too.
Yeah, and they have an awesome selection of other stuff. We've sent folks that direction lots of times.
They do. They sell more knife books than anybody in the world.
Yeah, for sure. And, Clay was really helpful with us and gave us access to all their reference info and other things for us to do research for the show. So we have great appreciation for Knife Magazine and the stuff they're doing over there. So, okay, www.thebokerbook.com. And then, Ricky, you said you guys have a Twitter account too, right?
We do. We are at Boker Book is our username there on Twitter. You can follow us there. Every now and then we'll post up some pretty nice pictures, a couple of cuts from the books. So, and that's another thing. We've got a couple of articles. I mentioned this book could probably have been, 400 pages instead of 178. We've got some articles on the webpage too that I think are pretty interesting. There's one on the Boker 155, which is one of the first pilot's knives. We've got an article about Ernst Felix, who was a really passionate lover of the cutlery industry, and he collected a lot of Boker history as well. Just a heck of a guy. We've got an article on various celluloid handled knives. So just when you go to www.thebokerbook.com, just scroll down to the bottom of the page, you'll see quite a few interesting articles that didn't make the book.
Yeah.
And if you even just punch in Boker Book, the first 4, 5, 6 headings are all come up with our book and website.
Yeah, buddy, cool. We own Google. Yes.
We own Google as far as Boker goes.
There you go. You must have done your homework, because that's a trick to get that done.
It really is. It took quite a bit of work, but we pushed our way.
That was all Ricky's work.
All right. Well, unless Michael or Sean have anything else that they want to chime in with here, I want to thank you guys for taking the time to talk with us about this. A really interesting slice of the knife world and cutlery history.
Man, this has been our pleasure. Thanks for hosting us.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mark.
Well, like you said, we folks know where to find the book. We'll probably follow up with a little info. We'll put a link in our Facebook group. We have a great bunch of folks who join us on Facebook. That's kind of our primary interaction with listeners, both there and Patreon. But the Facebook group is a great spot. Usually we'll post some reference stuff and other things there once an episode is released to kind of help guide people to where they can learn more. And so we'll get a link up in there once the show airs, and we'll have some good conversation. I'm sure it's often times that we have folks chime in too, which is kind of cool, because we'll talk about a subject or a historical maker, and someone will show up out of nowhere seemingly with a picture, or my uncle owns this one, or, great stuff like that. Yeah. So it's been really fun.
That's fantastic stuff. And I love stuff like that too, because as many years as we've been focusing strictly on Boker knives, I still on occasion, I see something that I have never seen before.
Yep.
All right. Well, that's it. Thanks everybody for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.
To learn more about our makers, you can find Tom Crine on the web at crineknives.net, in his Facebook group, Crine Knives, or in his Instagram account at Crine Knives. For Michael Birch, check birchtreeblades.com, Facebook group Birch Tree Blade Works, or Michael's Instagram at birchtreeblades. For myself and the Raygun Bead Project, we're on the web at raygundivision.com. We have a Facebook group called Raygun Division, or my personal Instagram at msteiner. For those interested in photos, references from the show, or some discussion about the show itself, you can find us on the web at markofthemaker.com, in a Facebook group called Mark of the Maker, or on our Instagram at Mark of the Maker. Last but not least, the ultra cool and haunting background music we use for the show is a piece called Noir Guitar by Stevie's Amp Shack, found at the Free Music Archive and licensed under Creative Commons CC BY 4.0. Thanks for listening.